Okay.
Hey.
Welcome, super secret agent trainees, to WhizGirls Academy. Today, we have a special mission with Katie Koube. She is at Icon, and she's going to tell us all about her journey from where she started. So, thank you, Katie, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I have a couple of pictures that I'm going to share and just kind of talk about my journey from when I was a little girl all the way to where I am now at Icon. So,
That's perfect. Yeah. So, tell us about your childhood.
yeah. So I grew up in Austin, Texas. I was actually born in Midland, Texas. If anyone knows where that is, it's West Texas and it's pretty much a desert. It's pretty barren. There's a lot of oil fields, and my dad actually worked out in those oil fields when I was a little girl. He really loved being outside, and I think that that was kind of inspired, like that kind of inspired me to really love the outdoors and exploration. Um, we were often traveling. My mom was a teacher, and so when they would get some time off, we would go and we would be in nature. We went to a lot of national parks, and we once traveled all the way to Houston, so the other side of Texas. It was about a 10-hour drive um, to go to NASA Johnson Space Center when I was about 7 or 8 years old. There's a picture here, and that for me was really an inspiration to kind of get into STEM and to explore both kind of geology and being outside. I think that was an inspiration for me, maybe growing up near the oil fields and then later in Austin where there's a ton of nature. And then kind of having that kind of presence of NASA around in Texas to want to be involved in space and in potentially, human spaceflight and exploration.
Wow.
Kind of in
Thank you for
addition,
sharing these pictures. They're so cool. And I think the astronaut, I guess, is that like an actual astronaut like outfit or?
I don't know. This was a thing that you could put your head in at the Johnson Space Center Visitors Center. I think that might be a replica or a training suit that they used. This was the early 90s. I would suspect that anything that had actually gone to space is perhaps behind glass now, but maybe not. Maybe not in the early 90s. So, um,
Very interesting. Okay, so tell us about your passions and hobbies as a child. And then, did you have a dream job?
yeah. So as a kid, I again really liked being outside. I liked hiking and running and soccer. I was definitely a pretty sporty kid. And I also was in choir for a very long time. So from the third grade, I want to say all the way up until junior year of high school, did a lot of choir recitals. It's kind of what's going on down here. So definitely a mix of passions and interests. I always enjoyed math and science. I wouldn't say it became a passion until kind of later on. It was something I was good at and really liked. But it was more initially, at least, something that I saw as a way to kind of go on adventures and do things that I kind of aspired to. I wanted to be an astronaut when I was younger. And barring that, I wanted to potentially be a oceanographer or a children's book author. So kind of all over the map. And I think maybe that was a little bit of the childhood as well. It certainly wasn't all STEM, but there was a lot of STEM interest going into it, but still a little bit of a well-rounded kid.
Okay, so actually, you brought up a word STEM, and I'm curious, like, when did you hear about that word, and like, did you have any mentors along the way?
Yeah, I think somewhere in middle school is where I would have heard kind of STEM as an acronym kind of first heard. And I think it's STEAM now, but when I was a kid, it was STEM. It's good that we're incorporating art. I think that's like an important part of it. So that's exciting. Um, but yeah, somewhere in middle school, and I did have some good mentors. So, like I said, my dad, he worked in the oil fields, and then later he worked as a technician in a chemistry lab out in Austin, doing like kind of water cleanliness checks. And I thought that was a really cool application of kind of science and being able to see that He was pretty encouraging, and my mom was really encouraging too, that all of us kids kind of follow those passions and also kind of like stay in the sciences and follow our interests there. I'm one of four, so I have two younger sisters and a younger brother. And in the sixth grade, they enrolled me in an after-school program to build my own computer. Computers were pretty common back then, but building your own as a kid felt intimidating. They were really encouraging, and my teacher there was my after-school teacher was very encouraging in this kind of program. She kind of worked with me kind of a little bit more individually. This was an all-girls program, so that was really cool and really unique at the time too. She worked with me individually to kind of teach me some coding languages in addition to kind of how to build the hardware. And she was just a really inspirational figure. And then when I got into high school, there were definitely a lot of really great mentors and figures from there. My physics teacher, he was fantastic. He really encouraged me to push a little bit further in my studies, particularly with, calculus-based physics later on in high school, and just kind of pursuing that a lot more seriously and rigorously. It's really, I think important to me deciding to perhaps go the STEM route rather than the children's book author route, which has been, proven to be a really exciting career and really worthwhile for me. So
yeah, that's interesting. So you brought up the sixth grade and learning how to code. Do you remember what coding languages you learned?
Oh gosh, I don't. We use a lot of Python now, and then I've used MATLAB in the past. A lot of these kind of data languages. I want to say we were using C++, maybe some Java, but it was all very rudimentary. But it grows. You're thinking about how to structure things, and you're thinking about how to structure language in a way that a computer understands. So that's really important. I don't think we learned a ton of code. We kind of touched on it. We learned a little bit, and we got a little bit into the dabbling stages, I'd say. But it stuck with me. It stuck with me as something that was interesting, and then also something that, like, okay, well, computers can be kind of taught. This is something that I can work with this computer just like I would work with any other language, and like making it understand me. I just need to type the right things, and then it'll know what I want it to do.
Yeah, and this was the after-school program in sixth grade. Okay, because I actually went to. Was it public school or was it a special program?
It was public school. It was under a Jumpstart program, and one really nice kind of advantage that we potentially had, I think, in Austin is that, computers really took off here with Michael Dell. And so this was something that he had funded for public schools kind of in the area to kind of build your own computer. And if you build it and it works, you could take it home. So that was a real big inspiration. We didn't have a computer at our house, so I really wanted to.
Yeah, something and a big reward if you build something and then it works. Then you get to play with it forever. That's very cool. Wow, that's awesome.
So,
yeah. Thanks for sharing.
I think the Jumpstart programs are still around. But yeah, this was kind of a partnership that he did with some of the public schools there.
Very interesting. Okay, so now tell us about your journey getting your degree. So you went to Northwestern and got an earth and plant and geophysics degree and also a material science and engineering degree. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so Northwestern's in Chicago, and that's where my dad and all of his family is from. He's one of 13, so I grew up kind of spending some time in Chicago every summer to get to know my cousins and to kind of be immersed in kind of that environment. And I really wanted to potentially, if I could, go to school in the Chicago area, which is why I was interested in Northwestern. They also have a really good engineering program. I knew I wanted to do engineering. I didn't necessarily know what kind of engineering. And I knew that I had an interest in physics and in chemistry, that I'd done well in those studies in high school. So I kind of came into Northwestern not really sure what I wanted to take pathwise, knowing that I wanted to be in STEM, knowing I wanted to do engineering or at least give it a shot. And then I took some kind of intro classes to materials engineering and sort of fell in love with that kind of intersection of physics and chemistry. We can chat a little bit about what a materials engineer does too, because I know it's maybe a little bit more obscure. But
Yeah,
then as I got, yeah.
if you could share with our secret agents what a material science engineer does, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so materials engineer is just someone who engineers materials. And you can work on anything from 3D printing and plastics to designing new metals and alloys to designing new silicon chips for your computers. And so it's a lot of chemistry and a lot of physics. And if you're interested in both of those things, it's a really nice intersection that also gets to make a big difference in the world every day. So most companies, if you're working in an engineering firm, will have an materials engineering department kind of working to make sure that everything that goes into making those components, may it be like your rocket ship or your cell phone, making sure that, you know, all of those materials are going to work together nicely and they're going to play together nicely, or in some cases designing new materials, right, that are going to improve the overall performance of those products. So I thought that was really exciting, and decided to major in that. And then, you know, the geology interest was always there. I started out just thinking I would, you know, take a couple of classes, maybe do a minor, and then just continuing to have an interest in a lot of the parallels between geology and materials engineering. You know, geology is the study of the earth, and the earth is made up of, you know, all sorts of materials. A lot of the processes that the earth goes through to make those materials are kind of similar to what we do in materials engineering in terms of, you know, how do things cool? How do things melt? How do you make a metal from kind of this molten pool? You might have those same questions about how a rock forms from lava. And so those kind of parallel interests to me made it seem like a very complementary kind of double major in college, and definitely was a nice kind of thing to pursue. One of the other things that I was really involved in, kind of the picture here, was a space kind of interest program. We had a microgravity team that we kind of put together within that space interest program. And so we actually got to fly on the Vomit Comet in college with NASA. And that was kind of my entryway into NASA and an interest there.
Wow. Okay, so then what happened next? Did you decide to go back to get a PhD, or like what did you do in between?
Yeah, so right out of college, I actually went straight to SpaceX. I wasn't really interested in pursuing a PhD at first. And I had kind of done some internships with NASA. I was really interested in working in the space sector. And a couple of my friends kind of from this space interest group had said, hey, you should really, you know, apply to SpaceX as well, give them a shot. So I applied to both. And ended up going to SpaceX for about 4 years, which was a really exciting time. I was there from 2014 to the very end of 2017, which is when we landed our first rockets. So I was involved in kind of the design and implementation of the heat shield that goes on the bottom of the Falcon 9 rocket, which is SpaceX's main rocket right now. It launches all of their satellites into space, and it also launches all of our American astronauts into space. And I was responsible for making sure that that heat shield worked, and then also designing it to be reusable. So after we landed our first rocket, the next step was to understand how we could use this heat shield again. And there's a lot of work that went into that, kind of doing what a scientist does, right? So you go, you look at your material, you say, okay, well, this is what's good about it, this is what's bad about it. And then you think about, okay, well, how do I iterate? And how do I run my next experiment to make sure that this material is going to work better the next time? And you continue doing that and do that enough times, and eventually you get to the point where we're at now, where they can launch, 10, 15 times in a row with the same heat shield, and things work. But I got to be involved in kind of some of the earlier stages of that planning and of that kind of iteration. So I was there for the first landed rocket, and then also the first relaunched and relanded rocket.
That sounds super exciting. And I think I read so much about how it's taken 18 years for the rockets to actually work and not explode. And it sounds like you were part of the finally it's working now.
Yeah.
And like curious if that was your first job, or because I read somewhere where you were doing something with NASA as a mission specialist and an analog astronaut. I'm curious like what that means. And then
Yeah.
also the NASA STRG, but it sounds like that was at Georgia Tech. So I guess let's go back a step and tell us about those.
Yeah, so SpaceX was my first job out of school. I had been an intern at NASA Johnson Space Center during college. One of the exciting things that you can do in college is intern with companies or with government organizations. So I'd done 3 semesters of internships with NASA during college, but then this was my first kind of full-time job out in California. About 4 years in, so at the beginning of 2018, I had actually decided that this was really exciting work, but I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into some of the problems that we were facing with how to reuse 3D printed metals on the bottom of a rocket or really anywhere. Reuse of 3D printed metals, if they've seen kind of any sort of exotic environment, which this definitely would count as, or environments with any 3D printed rocket, which is or 3D printed rocket or 3D printed engine, which is a very exciting and kind of hotly chased topic in our industry today, is difficult. It's hard to know where flaws are going to form. It's hard to know how things are going to break. And so those questions kind of led me back into grad school, which I worked with NASA to kind of fund that PhD and to help me answer those questions.
Okay, so that's interesting that you brought up 3D printers a ton, because we used to take our secret agents to tours of SpaceX back when they used to allow them, and we took a bunch of Girl Scouts and a bunch of different groups, and we saw those 3D printers, and they were massive. We've never seen anything like it. They were so cool, and we were like, this is how they print these, what you were just exactly talking about. So that is really, really cool. Okay, so then you went to Georgia Tech, and you got a PhD in materials science.
Yep, materials science and engineering. And so I got to work a lot on 3D printing metals. And I got to work a lot on thinking about, in addition to how you kind of make these metals more robust in dynamic environments where you're kind of maybe impacting things really quickly, or you have a lot of fire, things like that. I got to also work on thinking about, well, if we're on the moon and all we have are kind of rocks, which are oxides, which are kind of a metal element with an oxygen element. If we have these things, how do we have metals? How do we make metal? And so that was a good part of my PhD as well, was thinking about how do we 3D print metal on the moon? How do we 3D print metal in maybe places where it's difficult to access metal, but you have things like rust lying around. And so a big part of my PhD was looking at how we take rust, or some other ways known as iron oxide is kind of the technical term. How do we take iron oxides and how do we turn them into useful metals for people? And how do we do that in kind of environments that are maybe non-ideal or maybe a little bit rougher and more difficult to print in than a laboratory? And so this is a picture of a syringe of rust, along with a little bit of polymer that we use, a very small amount of polymer. We essentially exposed that to welding gas, and we're able to make metal parts. This is exciting kind of for the moon, but also for kind of getting access to metals in some extreme environments. So one really cool experience I got to have while I was in grad school was I got to travel to Uganda and kind of talk about this with PhD students in Uganda for kind of how you might be able to build, if not infrastructure, maybe small kind of tools or parts that need to be made rapidly, and you don't necessarily have the supply chains to get out to the more rural areas of the nation. And so that was something really exciting and meaningful for me, was to be able to be a part of those conversations where things are difficult to get to and access. How do we provide resources with what you have? And most people have rust. rusty parts, rusty things. They can access rust. So that's kind of some of the stuff that I got to work on while I was in graduate school.
Okay, so when did you get a license to be a private aircraft pilot?
Yeah, so that is something that I also was able to do in graduate school. There's a flying club at Georgia Tech that I got to be a part of. They offer nice discounted rates for private piloting, and just a really good community as well. All of our planes, we get to do a good amount of kind of the work to maintain them and kind of co-own them as students. So I thought that was also a really valuable experience to kind of see what the inside of an airplane looks like. Obviously, within the FAA regulations, we're doing spark plug changes and oil changes, nothing crazy there. But just kind of getting under the hood of the airplane and understanding that, I think, makes you a safer pilot. And then being part of a community of other people who are kind of interested in aviation and piloting was also a really cool experience. I'd wanted my private pilot's license for a really long time. And grad school was kind of a great time to do it in terms of the flexibility and then also the community that was kind of present there.
That's very cool. And you also have an advanced water diver license. Like, tell us about that and how that happened too.
Yeah, that I got while I was in college working at NASA. There was a group of people who were really interested in diving that I was coworkers with. And I was interested in kind of going out, and I'd never lived near an ocean before, and the Gulf of Mexico was kind of an ocean. And so I was interested in kind of being able to explore that a little bit more. And so we got our basic license, and then a couple of us were interested in maybe going and looking at things a little bit deeper, maybe a little bit more exotic than just kind of the depths you're allowed to go to with your basic license. So we went and got our advanced together. And that was a ton of fun, and something that, I don't use too much professionally, but is really enjoyable in terms of what you can do with it. We've gotten to go and see sea turtles and shipwrecks. And it's a lot of fun and pretty good exercise too.
Very cool. And so you're doing both now. Are you still diving and flying, or not as much?
Yeah, I'm still flying pretty regularly, a couple times a month, maybe every other week. The diving is a little trickier because I live in Austin now, so I'm away from water. But when I was living in, more watery lands, I guess, California, Houston, sometime in Florida, could dive a little bit more frequently.
Very cool. Okay, so you also have some publications and patents, and you've also volunteered and were a teacher. Like, tell us about those experiences and how they came about.
Yeah. So publications are kind of an important part of grad school, and just part of the scientific community too. So in undergrad, I was able to do a little bit of research. I was interested to kind of see what that was like, just doing basic and maybe even a little bit applied research, depending on the lab. So I worked in a couple of different labs in undergrad to get a feel for that. And some of those kind of experiments that we ran led to publications. Whenever you're in the scientific community, if you're working on something interesting, it's important to tell people about it so that they can make sure that you're thinking about things correctly and look for errors. But then also so that people can kind of build on what you're learning, build on what you've been working on, and kind of grow from there. And so one of the things I was really interested in undergrad was how to 3D print on the moon. It's something that kind of carried through to grad school a little bit with learning how to print with Rust and in these in situ environments. And then also in my current job with Icon, 3D printing on the moon has kind of been a theme, I suppose, kind of in the background of my whole career. And so, we were interested in, we were in my lab 3D printing, figuring out how to 3D print teeth and how to regrow teeth. That was what my lab was interested in doing. And that was the main part of my job. But I was interested in, what if we took this formulation and instead of putting in the ceramic, that is in our bones, it's called hydroxyapatite. What if we, instead of using that ceramic, we swap it out for fake moon dust or lunar regolith simulant? And so we bought some of that from a company called Exolith Labs. It's about $50 for, a little baggie of it. And we made a couple samples, and they actually worked really well, we thought, potentially for lunar tires or for lunar seals for habitats one day. And so this was an interesting result. We were really excited about it. We tested it, we characterized it, and then we wrote about it. A couple of other publications in grad school kind of felt very similar in terms of, we're interested in making this material. We think we can. Make sure that you always, work through your experiments, make sure you've answered the questions you have before you kind of write that and take that out into the world. But it's a fun process to kind of run these and kind of share that, share those discoveries with the wider scientific community.
Very cool. Okay, so then you have a few patents, and you want to tell us about those as well?
Yeah. So, sometimes if you make something that might have some kind of like commercial viability, I think the patent kind of in question was for those kind of lunar seals and that rubbery lunar material. You want to make sure that, it gets patented so that if you're, looking to start a business one day, you have that. And so we have a patent on kind of that lunar regolith 3D printed material. And yeah, it's great to see kind of as we go to build an Artemis moon base here in the future, hopefully some of those will be useful. So.
Very cool. Okay, so you have a ton of awards and honors. The Zonta Amelia Earhart Fellow, the NASA STRF Fellowship, the SpaceX on the Spot Award. You have actually a few from SpaceX. I saw the Kick-Ass one, which I thought was interesting, and the Rockstar one. Yeah. So tell us about all of those, and what was that experience like?
Yeah. The Amelia Earhart Fellow is for graduate students interested in aerospace engineering or in kind of adjacent fields to aerospace engineering, kind of contributing to aerospace. It's to recognize kind of women who excel in these fields and are contributing to the field. And it's an international award, so that was really cool to kind of meet other fellows who, come from as far away as India and Russia. I think several of our fellows were from China last when I won the year that I won, as well as parts of Europe. We had an Italian and someone from Spain, and to get to kind of meet these other women who are really making like huge impacts in the field of aerospace and kind of advancing kind of aerospace engineering and space engineering. And so I won this award for some of the work I was doing in graduate school on kind of 3D printing in these austere environments and 3D printing on the moon. At SpaceX, I won some awards for designing and making some improvements to our heat shield material on the back of our Falcon 9 rocket, as well as kind of some lengthy support runs at the launch site at Cape Canaveral. I think making sure that the rockets launch on time and trying to make sure that things are working there. So some improvements to the materials, and then also some times where you're working really hard and trying to make sure that things go well for some of those awards. And then the NASA fellowship, that was kind of given by NASA so that I could have funding in graduate school to do the work that won the later awards. So 3D printing on the moon, how do we do it? What are some ways that we could potentially make metals on the moon? We need a whole host of materials when we get to the moon, and trying to think about how to do that. And so I was very lucky that NASA paid for my PhD so that I could take some time to think about those questions and hopefully come up with some answers.
Okay, so tell us now what you're doing at ICON, and like I said, you have been volunteering and teaching, and how you find the time for balancing all of that stuff.
Yeah, so I actually took a summer when I was in when I was in undergrad to teach 7th grade science with a program called Breakthrough. It was kind of near to my heart. Some of my friends had gone through the program. They spoke really highly of it. And my mom being a teacher, I kind of just wanted to give back a little bit. And so I got to do that. And then, I don't do too much teaching at the moment, but I do love kind of volunteering and talking about my experiences, being present and kind of sharing in on that. I did get to do some teaching in graduate school, which is really, really nice and kind of one of the very enjoyable aspects of that job, teaching to kind of the college crowd as well. At Icon, Icon is a construction technologies company for the most part. So they develop advanced robotics and software and materials to deliver homes, mostly on Earth, but hopefully someday the moon as well. We've printed more than 100 homes and structures, and we're printing the first community of 3D printed homes. We have homes in Mexico for families living in extreme poverty that we've been able to print, which was, I think, really exciting for me personally, kind of making sure that we're giving back. And we've also built a series of homes for those experiencing chronic homelessness here in Austin, which is where we're located through a partnership with a organization called Community First. We're also, in addition to that, printing some of the largest communities of 3D printing homes just north of Austin in Georgetown, Texas, partnering with a construction company called Lennar. And then we've also built, with the Department of Defense, barracks for soldiers and those serving our country. In addition to kind of what's going on terrestrially, which is about 90% of the company, I get to work on space applications under a project called Progress Olympus. And we are working on providing, in addition to housing on Earth, we're doing this kind of project with NASA to build and construct habitats and lunar pads on the moon and eventually on Mars. So we're going to hopefully have a demonstration mission soon, and we're going to eventually be building landing pads and roadways and habitats for our astronauts. So that's kind of what our company does. What I get to do, I guess, a day in the life. So I'm a materials engineer at Icon for Project Olympus, like I said earlier, and I'm spending a lot of my time both finding materials that are similar in chemistry to the surface of the moon, the dust found on the lunar surface, so that lunar regolith, and then also thinking about the materials that we're using for those lunar simulants. They can be sourced from as far away as Greenland. We've been out to Montana to look for the perfect rocks. We take those, we kind of grind them up to approximately the same size and shape as the moon, and then we process them with lasers to make solid kind of brick-like materials to be used hopefully for landing pads in the future. So once we've made them, we characterize them. That's a large part of my job, to make sure that that we can make the best materials possible and that they're going to kind of withstand all of the environments that they might see. So we might crush them. We might shoot them with a torch. We might x-ray them or put them under the microscope to understand their structure. But we really want to make sure that materials that we have are strong, that they don't shatter or crack or break under changes in temperature or when they get hot, because those are the materials that are going to be best for a landing pad, and those are the materials that are going to be really useful on the moon. So I spend a lot of time kind of going through this cycle of finding materials that are similar to lunar dust, processing them, and then essentially breaking them. It's pretty cool.
Wow, it sounds like a really cool job. It seems like there's also a common theme with 3D printing in all of your jobs and experiences to date. And is there something you literally ever imagined as a kid, like 3D printing things, and then now breaking them down and kind of building them up again? I guess you did that when you were creating or putting together a computer from scratch. So
yeah, I definitely didn't envision 3D printing as a kid. I don't even think really until college did I really think about 3D printing at all. I knew I liked chemistry and physics, but I didn't come in kind of with any real notions of what I wanted to do. I took a class in college my junior year, actually in biomaterials, with a professor who was interested in 3D printing bones and regrowing teeth. And I just thought that's the coolest thing. Like, I want to be a part of this. And so, I did really well in her class, and asked if I could join her lab, or maybe like begged if I could join her lab. That was kind of my first experience with 3D printing. It was still, not a new technology, but it felt exotic to me, I think. And it certainly felt exotic to be 3D printing with something that wasn't a metal or a polymer. With these kind of like mixes of material, and it's something so versatile. I've gotten to get to do some traditional metals 3D printing in my career since then, but I think kind of getting to work with these exotic materials, and these really kind of different from the norm materials was where I first kind of got excited about it. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got into college, but this has definitely been like a really, really fun kind of career path so far, and definitely feel very lucky.
Sounds really, really cool. Okay, we're going to switch to some student questions and then we'll go back.
Yeah.
This is a comment and a question. You are a real life superhero and role model. Thank you. Have you had someone who inspired you in your STEM journey, and how did their encouragement help you become who you are today?
Yeah, I think there have been a couple of, definite superheroes and role models in my journey. I talked a little bit about some of them already, because they were just very influential. But, my physics teacher in high school, my parents for sure, they were very encouraging in kind of all of these interests from a very young age. Probably my lacrosse coach in school as well. I'd put him in the list. He was an engineer as his day job. He just kind of volunteered to coach us. And he certainly made sure that all of us were doing well in our studies, putting that first, encouraged me to kind of pursue some of the classes I maybe wouldn't have had the courage to pursue in high school. Because of him, I took a coding class in C++. I took an advanced physics class when I finished physics. Both he and my intro to physics teacher kind of encouraged that. And I certainly kind of challenged myself in ways that I might not have wanted to, or, been a little bit afraid to when I was in high school. And then in college, the professor who taught us about regrowing bones, that was Dr. Shaw. She was just amazing, and has kind of continued to be a mentor and an inspiration even to this day.
Very cool. Okay, here's another question. You were a mission specialist at the Human Exploration and Research Analog, HERA, at NASA. Were you selected as part of the final crew for the simulated trip to the Mars moon?
Yeah, so there's a moon on Mars called Phobos. And NASA is really interested in learning how people interact in confined environments. This was an opportunity that I had very recently, actually this year, to participate as a analog astronaut. So still on Earth, never left Earth, but got to hang out in this habitat here, 690 square feet, for 45 days. Not leaving, with three other amazing women. We were in this habitat for 45 days together with no access to the outside world, eating freeze-dried food, living and working in pretty confined spaces. You can see our bunk beds kind of up here. That was kind of right up here if you look in the overall habitat. We got to live in this space together and really get to know each other, and hopefully provide some valuable information to NASA scientists about, how people interact in these confined spaces over long periods of time. because the ISS is a fantastic analog for how we'll live and work on the moon and Mars, but it's pretty big. It's about the size of a football field. And so Hera, which is this kind of analog space here, simulates maybe what that journey to Mars will look like. So when we're in transit, how do people react when they're maybe in a very small space capsule or spaceship for these extended periods of time? They don't have maybe a nice habitat to get out and stretch their legs.
Very, very interesting. And that sounds really, really awesome. How did you hear about this program?
I actually heard about this program from a podcast, or one similar to it. So a colleague of mine in graduate school knew that I was interested in space. He was telling me, you've got to listen to this podcast about these people who are living in a similar habitat in Hawaii for 6 months. Theirs was slightly larger than ours, and they got to do simulated kind of spacewalks. But I listened to that and I was like, oh, that's so cool. It's called the High Seas mission. And in my mind, I was like, I want to do something like this. I want to, give it a shot. What is an analog astronaut like? Is this something I would enjoy? And just kind of pursue that. And so I started researching what those opportunities were while I was still in graduate school. I think I applied 3 or 4 times to this program before I ever heard back. And then, a couple months after I had graduated and started my job at Icon, I got a call back, hey, would like you to come down to Houston and interview. So it was very exciting. And I got to kind of have my 45 days, I guess, of isolation and, kind of living in this environment, starting in January of 2023. So January of this year.
Oh, wow. So it's recent. And so so I guess our secret agents are probably going to be really curious if they can do this. Like, is there an age limit? Is there requirements? You mentioned you have to get interviewed. So tell us all of that stuff. And then also beforehand, you have to prepare for whatever you do for the 45 days. And then after, what is the feeling when you come out of there after 45 days?
Yeah. So there is an age limit. You have to be between the ages of 30 and I believe 55 is the age cutoff currently. You need a master's degree in a STEM field or equivalent work experience. I think almost everyone on our crew had at least a master's. A couple of us had PhDs, so myself and one other had a PhD. And it's basically looking for people who have very similar qualifications to real astronauts. So they want someone who, works in a STEM field, is fit, and healthy. So we gave a lot of blood to make sure that we were healthy and fit for this mission. And then they interview you on the phone a couple of times, and if if they like what they hear, they'll invite you down to Houston for a several-day interview to make sure that they think you'll do well in this sort of environment. And so I think I started applying when I was too young. I applied for the first time when I was, 28 or 29. I was like, it's close enough. It wasn't. I got rejected. And then, finally got this opportunity kind of a little bit later.
Very, very cool. And how long have they been doing this for? Do you know?
Oh, gosh, I'm not sure. So we were the 6th campaign and the 4th mission within that campaign. So there's 4 missions per campaign. I think they've been doing this for maybe a decade, for a while. And the mission started out, initially they were shorter. So they were, 7 days, 14 days, and then slowly they worked their way up to these 45-day missions. I think their typical cadence is about 4 missions in a year. So maybe 1 a quarter. But I'm unfortunately not sure exactly when they started.
Okay, we'll have to do some research and add it to the show notes. But I feel like it's a little too young for our secret agents, but I'm sure they'll probably want to sign up because we had someone from NASA JPL come to the school and she brought some moon rocks and different things from the Mars exploration, and they were going wild over it. So yeah, I think this will be another thing that's really exciting and good to know down the road for them in their STEM journey. Okay, let's go back to those student questions. What superpowers do you find that you have that have pushed you to where you are today?
I think not being afraid to ask questions and just, reach out to people. I think, most people are really excited to talk about their journeys and about what they do, and you can learn a lot from that, and just really get to a lot of cool places. I don't think you necessarily have to have the end goal in mind. I think you can allow yourself to change that end goal as you go. But I think, getting started, asking questions and reaching out to people, being able to do that and do that with a smile on your face has been really important to me. It didn't go anywhere, but in my, junior year of high school, I reached out to a Nobel laureate from one of the national labs in Chicago and was like, hey, could I have a tour? And he wrote back and said yes. He was going to give us a tour of one of the accelerators down in Chicago at Argonne National Labs, which was just really cool. Unfortunately, we couldn't get down to Chicago in any time frame that kind of worked, but people are so willing to share what they do, and people are excited about it. And if you ask, I think that opens a lot of doors.
So true. Okay, on that note, what did you learn when you were 11 years old that you have kept with you today?
I think it's pretty similar. Like, if you fail at something or if something is hard, that's not a reason to stop. I struggled a lot with my Spanish classes. So not necessarily STEM related, but something I was struggling with at 11 was doing well in Spanish. It's something I really wanted to do. I wanted to learn Spanish. It's important in Texas. And it's something, that was interesting to me, but that I wasn't very naturally good at. And I worked through it. I studied extra hard. I kind of changed my techniques to study with more people, maybe people who were better at Spanish than I was. And maybe I was better at, algebra than they were, and work with them. And, I was able to improve my Spanish immensely. And, when I was 12 and 13 and 14 and still kind of continuing on in Spanish classes, did much better and eventually got a lot better at Spanish. And so I think, the lesson from there for me was working with other people, reaching out to, maybe your peers who are doing better at something than you and asking for help. And then realizing that you have skills that you can help them with and being able to kind of work collaboratively there, and not being afraid to be bad at something and still keep working.
Yeah, that's all great advice. Okay, so looking to the future is exciting. What do you imagine for girls in STEM down the road? And how can we make sure that everyone gets a chance to be part of the STEM adventure?
Yeah, I hope that there are more girls in STEM down the road. It's really exciting to see kind of more young engineers come up and participate. And I hope that trend kind of continues. I hope we see a lot more girls in STEM, and I hope that they get to come and bring, their creative ideas and their energy into this field. We have a lot to offer, and, everyone is excited to work with us. I'm excited to work with all of you when you are kind of continuing in your STEM journey. I think, in terms of making sure that everyone has access to kind of the STEM adventure, that's something that we all work on. We want to make sure that you get to hear these stories and that you get to have kind of experiences right now that I think kind of help to continue. It's not just one journey, right? It's a lot of small steps. I guess it is one journey. It's a lot of small steps within that journey. And so, I hope that, if you have some sort of stumble along the way in terms of maybe something is hard or maybe someone, was unkind, that number one, you'll persevere through that. But number two, that, we have less of that unkindness as you're coming in.
That's a good point. I think that's really helpful, but also in general, like what kind of advice would you give our aspiring secret agent trainees in the audience?
Yeah. So definitely keep working towards your STEM journey. Take the math classes, take the science classes as they're offered. I know that, not everywhere has all of the science classes or all of the math classes. I was able to take some classes in community college. I thought that those were really helpful. A lot of times those classes will be free when you get into high school. At least in Texas they were. I think that's pretty common. And I think, yeah, just trying to push for those opportunities as you see them.
Awesome.
It all builds.
Yeah.
So,
thank you for sharing that. Okay, how can our special secret agent trainees follow your journey moving forward? Do you have a website? Is it Instagram? Is it LinkedIn? What's the best way to keep in touch?
Yeah, I have a LinkedIn, and I'm going to work on getting a better social media presence. I don't currently have an Instagram or a Facebook or anything like that, but I will be making an Instagram soon. So we'll share that handle when it's there. But for now, I have a LinkedIn, and please feel free to message me, and I'll message back. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for the pictures that you shared. I think those would be great on your Instagram because everyone would be fascinated by your journey from childhood until now and this experience. And I'm sure you have more pictures that everyone would be really excited to see.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to switch to the 60-second questions and then we'll do key takeaways. Okay, so favorite toy as a child?
I had some Lincoln Logs that I really enjoyed. My brother and I would play with those for hours.
Very cool. Okay, so favorite video game?
I really liked Zelda.
Zelda.
The first Zelda.
Yeah, Zelda was very cool. Favorite superhero?
Spider-Man.
Did you see the recent, I think, was the Metaverse one or something like that, Multiverse?
Oh, I saw the Metaverse. I haven't seen the newest, like Into the Spideyverse yet. I think
I haven't seen that one lately either. Yeah, but the other one was really good. Let's see. So favorite sci-fi, is it like Star Wars or Star Trek or both?
Probably Star Trek. Star Wars is great too, but I think Star Trek wins out just a little bit.
Okay, cool. Favorite animated series or show growing up as a child?
Definitely Pokemon. Power Rangers maybe in early childhood, but when Pokemon entered the scene, that was it for our family, and for me as well.
Very cool. And did you ever get into the Pokemon Go games?
Yeah, I did. My husband and I actually played a lot when we were in Atlanta. We haven't played as much in Austin, but when I was in graduate school, we used to play pretty frequently.
Yeah, I know that was a craze because I remember going places here downtown and there was like signs saying, we don't have this Pokemon character, like leave us alone. like anthropology in downtown. Like, wow. It's like, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Wild. Okay, let's see what else. Favorite movie?
I really liked Top Gun, the last one that came out, and the regular, just kind of the first Top Gun as a kid. I'm trying to think if that's been updated, but I might have to stick with Top Gun, and it's kind of the updated Top Gun as well. Maybe has surpassed it.
One, right? The most recent one was Maverick.
Yeah, Maverick was pretty good.
That was really cool. I'm sure as a pilot you saw it very, very differently than I did as a normal human that just goes on the plane, doesn't fly it. But yeah, that was exciting. Very exciting. I'm surprised it took that long to make after all these years, but I'm glad they did it.
Yeah, they did a good job. I went with a couple of pilot friends and we had a blast.
It was very cool. Okay, we're going to do key takeaways, so please feel free to chime in if we missed anything. Okay, so take in the opportunities around you, pursue the things that you are interested in, grasp the chances to learn and grow, perfect your skills with practice, be prepared to get into the unexpected. Role models are in your everyday lives. If you fail at something or if something is hard, that is not a reason to stop. Continue to take on and work through your goals despite the challenges. Don't be shy to work with others and reach out to your peers. There will be a lot of small steps within your journey to success.
That's good.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your journey with us, your phenomenal journey from Northwestern and then Georgia Tech and SpaceX and NASA and the analog astronaut to now Icon. We're very, very excited to follow your journey moving forward. Thank you again for the time. And Secret Agents, we'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thanks. It's nice to meet everyone.